So now that I have the basic relationship between game objects and scripts, I want to push this concept forward a little bit to make this cube object something that the first person uh, camera controller can pick up. And now this is going to be a two-step process. The first thing that I need to do is I need to identify this player status script. And I want to drag and drop that onto the first person controller. Okay, now this is a slightly more complex script than the one that we've looked at, but I'll just give it a double click and we'll take a look at some of the components here. Now, you'll notice that there's a green bit of script, or at least in my window it's green. It starts with a // this is a comment, and this is pretty typical when it comes to scripts. And the more scripts that you open or even that you create, it's very helpful to comment on the scripts. It'll give you some notes along the way, and it'll help you stay organized. So even when you're creating your own scripts, you might throw in some comments, and what the / does is it completely ignores that line of code, and it doesn't interpret it as code. If I take off these slashes on the script and I delete those, you'll see that the color changes in my window, and Unity actually tries to interpret that as something that it should run, and in fact that script will error if I get rid of that / And in fact, scripting can be very particular. If I inadvertently delete this semicolon, or I accidentally move or get rid of one of these brackets, this whole script could may no longer function, or at the very least I'll get a scripting error in Unity. And so I want to be very mindful of what I'm changing and when I'm changing it. And with regard to the player status script, there's really nothing I need to change. I just need to drag and drop that onto the first person controller. But I have opened up this script, and I just want to talk to you about some basic components here. There's a couple of variables. There's a health and a points variable. And so this script is going to track what the health is and how many points the player has accumulated. And there's some basic functionality here that basically says that if health is less than or equal to 0, execute this kill function. And all that the kill function is doing is simply showing a bit of text that says you're dead. It doesn't really actually do anything to the player, and it doesn't make you restart or change your position or start over or anything like that. It's just a simple bit of text that'll pop up in the console letting you know that your health is equal to 0. There's also an add points functionality. And currently, if you meet or exceed 100 points, then it executes this win function. And just as the kill function is in place, it's just kind of a temporary little bit of text that says you've won. Now we can modify these scripts later on and actually execute some other events. So we could, if we win, we could actually go to another level, or if we pick up enough things and earn enough points, we could trigger an event where maybe a bridge will appear or animate, or a fire will start. I mean, there's a number of things that we can do, and it's simply by triggering a series of other little scripts. So that's the basic functionality. This script actually just keeps track of health and points. And so I've dragged that onto my first-person controller, and I can confirm that by selecting the first-person controller. And I can look down here and see that there's a player status script. There's several more scripts on my first-person controller, and that came with all of these scripts: the mouse look, the character motor, and the FPS input. Those were already there. What I've added was this player status script. Now, by selecting the first-person controller, you can see that there are some public variables here. There's a health variable that's set to 0, and one of the really nice things about working in Unity is that I have this script, but I can actually modify these variables through the Unity engine. So if you've been exposed to any kind of programming, you may already be aware of a variable, and this a variable is just something that can change over time. And right now we've established two variables, and that's health and points. And throughout this game, we're gonna add to, or we're gonna plus or minus these values, and we're gonna check to see if a condition is true. So, we might come across some objects that increase our health, and we might come across some events or objects that decrease our health. All the while, we're checking to see if our health reaches 0 or if our points equal 100. And so by selecting the first-person controller, we can set our health to an initial value. And I'll just key in the value of 100, and I'll hit return. I'll leave my points set to 0. And so now I have a first-person controller that actively has a health of 100, and it has 0 points, and we'll start to establish a scenario where we can take on health damage, and we can start to earn some points. So right now, nothing's really going to happen. I can hit the play button, and I would never know the difference. I would never know that anything's being tracked, but we'll start to take care of that in just a minute. So the first step is to apply this player status script to the first-person controller. The second step is to focus on this pickup script, and I'll just double-click on the pickup script, and I'll open it up and attach this to anything that we want to be able to pick up. This script is relatively simple and straightforward. It looks a little abstract until we start to look at what it's doing. There's a public variable that's called points, and we'll get to that in just a minute. There's an update function that really doesn't do anything right now. And then there's a function what's called onTriggerEnter, and it checks to see if a collision has been made. So it's basically saying once you enter a collider, so if I run into the thing that this script is attached to, it's going to execute this script. And basically what it's saying is it's looking for a player status script. That's what this whole line is doing. And it's adding points, and it's adding whatever the value of the points are here to our player status. In addition to that, it's looking for another script called object collect, and it's updating the object collect interface, and then finally it's destroying the object that it's attached to. Now remember, this is all, you could think of this, this is all object-oriented stuff. And so all this stuff that's being applied, if it doesn't explicitly say to apply it to something else, is modifying the game object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this pickup script, and I want to apply it to the cube. So I'm going to drag and drop it onto the cube. And so now when I look at the cube, I can see that the pickup script is attached to the cube. Now, there's going to be one more step that we have to, or at least one more step that we have to go through, and I want to demonstrate this point by hitting play. If I go and try to run into this cube, we run into the same problem that we ran into before, which is that, yeah, I'm running into the cube, but nothing's happening because there's a collider on it, and that collider is functioning in a very particular way. Now, if this script was functioning properly, based on the script that I've applied, this pickup script, it should destroy this game object. So when I run into it, it should disappear, and it should execute all this other functionality. Well, in order for this to work properly, I need to go back to the cube, and I need to look at this box collider, and I need to make sure this is trigger is selected. So in other words, it's looking for an active trigger. And the trigger that we're looking for is a collision. So now if I go back and look at this pickup script, I won't open it in Unitron. I'm just going to give it a single click and look at it through Unity. It's on trigger enter, and before it wasn't a trigger. Now we've told it to act as a trigger, and that collider is the thing that's the trigger. Now it's going to update the player status. It's going to add some points, and it's going to do this object collect thing, which we'll take a closer look at a little bit later. And it's going to destroy the game object. Now, the only thing that we're going to be able to see evidence of this thing working is that when we walk through the cube, if everything is working properly, when I go back and look at the cube, it's gone. So in other words, that object has been destroyed. That game object is no longer. It did, in fact, also add some points to my player status, although I have no idea how to, it's not keeping track of that, so I have no idea that that did, in fact, occur. But I'm convinced that the script is working properly, again, because that cube disappears when I run into it. So when I pass through that, my first-person camera collides with that object and destroys the game object. So the first step is to assign your player status to your first-person controller. The second step is to apply the pickup script to the game object that you created. In my case, it was a cube. But also to make sure that that cube has a collider and the trigger is turned on. Run through that process. We'll push this a little bit farther in the next presentation.